The School of Extension and Development Studies at IGNOU offers MA in Extension and Development Studies in face-to-face and open distance learning ODL mode. One of its program is on environment and development. To discuss this, we have an eminent scientist, Professor P.S. RamaKrishnan from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Before I start discussion, I would like to brief about Professor P.S. RamaKrishnan. Professor P.S. RamaKrishnan is an eminent scientist and ecologist from JNU. He has more than 400 research papers to his credit and 18 books to his credit. Currently, he is involved in guiding more than 200 scientists on different issues of ecology across the country. I welcome you, sir, to this discussion. First of all, please tell your views. How do you perceive the issues of environment and development, sir?
The issues of environment and development in this country as well as in many other countries have always followed a top down approach, and there is an increasing realization today than ever before that the developmental issues have to have a bottom up approach involving communities in various facets of development, and that is an issue which is becoming more and more important in the contemporary context, where the natural resources are getting depleted very rapidly and the developmental programs have not been able to reach up to the bottom layer of the society. And in a country like India, where we have almost 3/4 of the population who are to a greater or lesser extent marginalized, it becomes very important that the developmental efforts should percolate to all levels, all sections of the society. And that is the context in which we have to look at conservation linked sustainable livelihood or sustainable development of different sectors of the society.
Sir, what according to you are the major international environmental problems today?
One of the important problems that has been very often highlighted in the media, both the written media as well as in the audiovisual media, is the issue of climate change, and climate change linked with particularly emphasizing upon the global warming. Now, but what is often not realized by a large section of the society is that climate change cannot be looked at in isolation. You have to look at climate change as part of a global change set of issues. And you will ask me what the global change means. Global change covers a whole variety of issues. Land use and land cover change is one of the very important issues as far as global change is concerned. Linked with land use and land cover change is the issue of biodiversity and biodiversity depletion, and linked with all this is the issue of invasive species coming in and taking over a large area of the landscape. And invasive species are species which are exotics, and they are not adjusted to the given environmental situation, but once they get adjusted, they spread like wildfire, and they also cause depletion of the biodiversity. So, a whole variety of issues are linked together along with climate change and global warming. So, one has to look at the environmental issues in a much more holistic sense rather than looking at it from in isolation. Now, talking about the global change and particularly the climate change and global warming, one of the things that people have to realize is that it is going to increase environmental uncertainties. The earth is warming, no doubt, but then warming is less important than the environmental uncertainties that this global warming process is going to cause. Or in other words, communities have all the time faced environmental uncertainties to a greater or lesser extent. But if the environmental uncertainties go beyond a particular point, then it is going to create a whole variety of problems in terms of food security, in terms of migration of people from one region to another, and even conflicts occurring on a smaller or a larger scale in different parts of the world. That is one dimension. The other dimension, which is not very often emphasized so much, is the issue of globalization of economies. People talk about climate change much more than globalization economies. And at one point of time, I had an opportunity to be part of a team of international scientists, 25 or 30 people getting together and trying to look at the impact of globalization. And one of the major conclusions that emerged from that was globalization of economies is also going to increase environmental uncertainties. And these environmental uncertainties are caused by the fact that you are going to convert much of your landscape into monocultures. People are saying that globalization means that if you are able to produce tea in your according to your climatic conditions, produce it in large quantities and export outside, we will produce something else and then we will give it to you. Or in other words, the land will be converted into large monocultures. And when that happens, the biodiversity depletion is automatically going to take place and the environmental uncertainties will become exaggerated, and the only tool that we have at our disposal to cope up with environmental uncertainties is the biodiversity that we have at our disposal. But if we are going to lose that biodiversity, then that is going to create a lot of food security problems, again the same kind of problems that I talked to you about in terms of conflicting situations emerging and peace problems related at a local level, local peace, regional peace as well as global peace. I mean, these are going to be disturbed to a very large extent.
So, to what extent Government of India has addressed the environmental problems in India?
The environmental problems in India have started in the context of climate change. For example, there is an increasing realization today than ever before in the Indian context about the implications of climate change. And this has been discussed in a variety of different fora, and there is much greater awareness as far as the climate change related issues are concerned than what we had ever before. But in real terms of the putting the conservation linked developmental mechanisms in place, we are still right at the very beginning. Perhaps there are some isolated efforts in order to be able to move forward in that direction. Say for example, the joint forest management kind of issues that are being emphasized more and more, where community participation is required in terms of conserving forests, in terms of conserving biodiversity and its sustainable management. But in real terms, we have a long way to go in terms of putting our action to get into the action mode, if I may say so.
So, what are those environmental problems in India which needs immediate attention?
The environmental problems in India that needs attention are manifold. We in this country over the last more than 100 years, we have lost a lot of our natural biodiversity. Deforestation has been happening. It started during the British times, and the resources were taken away in order to be able to fuel the economy of the colonizing country, the colonizers. Subsequently, after we got independence, the resources have been removed in order to be able to industrialize parts of the country which are far away placed, and therefore, the resource depletion has been caused by external forces, largely market pressures operating at the national and the international level, and also because of the policy decisions that are taken by the government. And so, one of the very important things that becomes important from our point of view at this stage is how do we have a good restoration rehabilitation mechanism put in place in terms of our natural resources. Some small efforts have started already, like say for example, joint forest management initiated by the forest department, where communities are to participate in the conservation and management of natural forests, but they are extremely in a very preliminary stages. I mean, we have to go a long way in terms of putting our action in proper place.
So, coming to the natural resource management, how can we check the problems of natural resource management in mountainous, coastal and arid regions of our countries?
Well, the entire issue of natural resource management is linked with the society. Now, there are some isolated examples like the Sukumajiri project, which took place quite a few years ago from now, and more than 10-15 years ago, a very small effort in a watershed catchment area, where the NGO community participated in order to be able to ensure community participation, in order to get that activity going. Now, the Sukumajiri example is even now quoted very widely as one of the success stories in terms of community participation. But this kind of community participation has very often not happened in a major way in many parts of the country. At one point of time, just about 10 years or so, more than 10 years ago, there was an initiative to have a community participatory natural resource management related program in the state of Nagaland. It was an India Canada Environment Facility funded program, and that program was based upon the community participation was based upon a value system that the communities understand and appreciate, and therefore, they are able to participate in the process of development and development of natural resources, development of biodiversity in the region. Now, that was one initiative which has happened on a much larger scale. I mean, the India Canada Environment Facility related activity was directly done in over 200 villages in Nagaland, but Nagaland has got 1,200 villages or so, and all the villages, the rest of the villages were called as observers to observe what is being done in these 200 study areas or developmental sites, and they were supposed to go back and then replicate it. In other words, over a period of 3 or 4 years time, all the 1,200 villagers participated in a conservation related initiative, and at the same time mostly the people in Nagaland are shifting agricultural farmers, and these farmers were able to improve the productivity from their agricultural systems, because the issues were not looked in isolation from one another. It was not forestry versus agriculture. The whole thing was looked at in the context of a landscape management, and therefore, the farmers in many places were able to get, where somebody was getting 5,000 rupees per hectare, he was able to get up to 20 or 25,000 rupees per hectare from his land as agricultural produce. So, this was an initiative which perhaps one of the first initiatives that has ever happened, which looked at not only the conservation of natural biodiversity, but also conservation of agricultural biodiversity in these traditional agricultural practices, and at the same time an improved quality of life for the people in the region. But these are all very isolated examples, and I think we have to go a long way in this direction in order to be able to address issues linked with climate change and the process of globalization of economies that are happening. Both are acting synergistically, one supporting the other in terms of enlarging or magnifying the environmental uncertainties.
So, you have given examples from Nagaland. We all know that Northeast India and entire mountainous region is very rich in traditional knowledge systems. Why our developmental policies ignore traditional knowledge systems?
There are a whole variety of reasons for that kind of situation prevailing. At one point of time, when we started looking at my group in the northeastern region, northeastern hill region, started looking traditional knowledge, the kind of belief that existed was that they used to confuse traditional knowledge with local knowledge. And even today, traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge is oftentimes confused with local knowledge. Now, that creates a lot of complication. For one thing, in a situation like northeastern region, according to anthropologists, there are 200 ethnic groups. Some of the conservative anthropologists say that there are 200 ethnic groups, and some of the more liberal anthropologists go up to make a statement saying that there are over 500 ethnic groups. And when you say that 500 ethnic groups or 200 ethnic groups have got their own knowledge system, then in that case converting that knowledge system into conservation linked developmental initiative is a very difficult task. Now, the planning commission, the state planning commission or the national planning commission may turn around and say that we do not do planning for 20 square kilometers of land area. Give us something that is applicable on a much larger scale, so that we can have a regional developmental plan. And that is an issue which started receiving attention only in recent times during the last 2 or 3 decades. And fortunately for us, we were one of the first groups to start that activity in that northeastern region, trying to look at how the individual ethnic societies manage their natural resources, and trying to look at whether we can arrive at some generalizations which are applicable across board on a regional scale. And to a very large extent we were able to succeed over a period of time, and therefore it became possible to convert the research results into developmental initiative. And that is how the Nagaland project that I talked about emerged eventually after about 20-25 years of research that happened in that region. And that Nagaland project is very often referred to as the NEPET project, Nagaland Environmental Protection and Economic Development Project. And that project was under the India-Canada Environment Facility. They very reluctantly put their money for 5 years, but on their own they went for another 5 years, seeing the success of the program. So, it is a very complicated job, and to link knowledge systems, and linking knowledge systems becomes even more important, because you cannot look at traditional ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge in isolation. We are in a changing world, the world has changed quite a bit, and therefore traditional knowledge cannot stand on its own. So, you have to combine it with the textbook based formal knowledge and formal technologies that are available, the modern technologies that are available. So, the challenge before any developmental agency is how do you integrate the two knowledge systems, and how do you create what one calls as hybrid technologies. And that was a challenge that was addressed by us when we were working in the northeastern region, subsequently enlarged to other parts of the world.
So, what do we understand about sustainable agriculture? As you have given example of Northeast and Naga community who are involved in what we call terrace cultivation, where they integrate fish farming along with rice cultivation. We also know about the jhum, and you have done elaborate work on the jhum cultivation, sir. So, what do we understand sustainable agriculture?
Now, let me just start with the jhum, the shifting agriculture in the northeast. When we started working there, we said that the shifting agricultural farmers are dependent upon biodiversity in order to sustain their agricultural systems. They are dependent upon not only the natural biodiversity that exists in the forested area, but they are also dependent upon the agricultural biodiversity, the crop biodiversity that they have conserved over a period of time. And therefore, it became very difficult for us to believe that the shifting agricultural farmers or the jhum farmers will destroy their own biodiversity. When we started looking at the issue of deforestation in the northeast, one of the issues that emerged was that the deforestation in the northeastern region has always been caused largely by external forces. And when this was not acceptable at that point of time when we said this. People used to say that shifting agricultural farmers do not know what they are doing, they are destroying the forests. And but we try to show that they are not responsible for deforestation in the region. Now, this was picked up through a tri-academy project between India, China and United States, trying to look at the very obvious and the not so obvious causes for deforestation. And one of the areas that we chose in the Indian context, we had two study areas in the Indian context. One was in Western Ghats and the other was in the Green Revolution agricultural area in Punjab, Haryana. And on the basis of that study, we were able to show that the Green Revolution is on its downward trend. And people did not want to believe it at that point of time when we said this, but it did not take more than 5 or 7 years for the agricultural scientists to recognize the fact that the green revolution is on a downward trend. And so the issue of sustainable agriculture has to be looked at from the point of view of how long can you sustain high energy managed agricultural systems. I mean, the Haryana Punjab agricultural system is largely dependent upon heavy input of fertilizers, heavy input of water, and these resources are water is in short supply. So, you are likely to exhaust it over a period of time. When you use too much of fertilizer, the land degradation starts happening very rapidly and the system starts breaking down. And that is the context in which you need to look at the whole issue of sustainable agriculture. Now, in the Green Revolution agricultural area, there are at least some more innovative farmers are going towards to have organic residue management as one of the possibilities in order to have sustainable agriculture. But here again the problem is that sustainable residue management has to be scientifically based, otherwise it is a hit and trial. Sometimes you may succeed, sometimes you may not succeed. So, that leads to dejection and some degree of frustration among the agricultural farmers, and then they do not know what to do. And that is the context in which the sustainable agricultural related issues have to be looked at.
So, what changes do you foresee in agriculture due to climate change? Because you have touched upon the climate change issues and you have also talked about sustainable agriculture. For our viewers, would you please tell in brief that what are the likely changes or impacts we are going to face in future?
Well, one of the impacts that has already started happening is the depletion of water resources. The water table in Haryana and Punjab is going down very rapidly. The water is being excessively pumped up in many places even today, and that has led to salinization of the land over a period of time, and the productivity of the land obviously suffers. That is one of the consequences that is linked with directly linked with excessive use of water that is happening. And as I said, climate change cannot be looked at in isolation. You have to look at it in an overall context of global change. That global change obviously is land use, land cover change, biodiversity depletion, land degradation and biological invasion, and climate change is one of the important factors within that, and the global warming. Now, having said that, the kind of issues that are emerging now is that climate change is going to enhance environmental uncertainties. Linked with this are problems of land degradation that is happening, land losing the capacity to production, to increase the productivity or even sustain the productivity. And therefore, the environmental uncertainties are going to create catastrophic conditions in many situations over a period of time. And that is the context in which the sustainable agriculture has to be viewed.
In terms of productivity, sir, and agriculture, do you feel that in the mountainous area where certain crops are being grown today would not be grown because of the impact on climate change, sir, because of increase in temperature, say cultivation of certain crops will vanish from the mountainous area? Do you think, sir?
Well, there are a whole variety of things are going to happen. The productivity of the traditional rice and wheat that we grow, that is going to decline over a period of time, and in some years there may be excessive rainfall and flooding of the land, and on other occasions there may be a long spell, dry spell happening. That is one kind of problem that is going to increase over a period of time, as I said, largely due to climate change and also due to globalization of economies. And coping up with that kind of a situation is going to be a problem. Now, when people talk about organic residue management, one need to look at also, are you choosing the right kind of organic residues? Now, you mentioned about some of the crop species disappearing. Now, in the shifting agricultural areas in northeast India, for example, the farmers always tend to include some of the legumes, and one of the lesser known legumes is called as Flemingia, and this Flemingia is a species which produces fruits which are edible, and these edible fruits provides nutrition, particularly protein, to these people, and particularly during the dry lean season, during the winter months. And while they depend upon this crop for a whole variety of nutritional reasons, they also depend upon this crop in order to improve the soil fertility. Flemingia is a leguminous species, and this species fixes something like 125 to 130 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. Under more favorable situations, it fixes something up to about 200 or 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So, those kinds of species are going to decline over a period of time, and because their agricultural system starts breaking down. And if that happens, these the most marginalized people, what we call as tribals, are going to be left high and dry, and that is going to create a whole variety of problems, even in terms of not only food security for these people and starvation deaths, but also in terms of conflicts occurring between different sections of the society.
So, what do you think about carbon footprints? The issue is in discussion these days. Our students and viewers would like to know that what are these issues of carbon footprint.
Well, carbon footprint means different things depending upon the kind of issues that you are talking about. I mean, we have left one of the largest carbon footprints during the last 100 years. I mean, the industrialized world started it in terms of depleting the carbon resources that are available, that stored carbon resources, and we in the developing world are more or less following the same path so far in terms of the so called industrialization and modernization of land use practices and so on, and all this is happening at the expense of depletion of biological diversity. And depletion of biological diversity is one of the elements that one needs to take into account when one talks about the carbon footprint that we are leaving. And we are also depleting the stored carbon resources, organic resources within the soil. The organic matter is getting depleted very rapidly because we are doing agriculture the wrong way in terms of excessive use of fertilizers, pesticides, excessive use of water, and therefore the carbon is being depleted. So, we are depleting the carbon resources in another way. So, there are a whole variety of ways in which humans are depleting in a negative sense of the term, depleting the carbon pool that we have at our disposal, which is one of the very important resource to cope up with the emerging environmental uncertainties. Now, that is the negative way of looking at it. One can look at it in a positive way. There are many attempts like joint forest management that is being initiated now by the forestry sector. For example, there are efforts being made by a variety of NGOs in order to be able to draw in the local communities in order to be able to raise increase the green cover, for example. Now, those are positive ways of looking at the footprints, and even the governmental agencies are now talking about how do we increase the green cover, so that we are able to sequester carbon within our systems, and this sequestered carbon gets some kind of a reward from the international community in terms of coping up with environmental uncertainties arising from climate change and so on. So, you can look at carbon footprint either from both angles, either from a negative angle, which has already been happening in a major way over a period of time. Now that things are changing the other way around now, and people are talking about how do we increase the carbon sequestration. So, we are going in the positive direction to a certain extent.
So, this carbon credit system, is this same with the carbon sequestration which you have talked, sir?
I suppose it is one and the same thing. How do you increase the amount of the carbon budget within the system? How do you conserve your biological resources? How do you increase the biodiversity? How do you increase the biomass within the land, and thereby you are able to increase the carbon stock within the biosphere, and therefore, that is one of the mechanisms by which we believe that we will be able to cope up to a certain extent with the emerging climate change because of these industrial activities that we have been pursuing.
So, do you think that agriculture extension has done substantial to increase the agriculture productivity? Similarly, health extension has done substantially in the field of raising awareness in the areas of health issues. So, do you feel that there is a need for environmental extension education to address the issue of climate change, carbon sequestration, and overall in the field of natural resource management?
We have done fairly well until recent times. I mean, at one point of time, if you look at the agricultural sector, I mean, one of the concerns was that starvation deaths were very prevalent within this country, and at that point of time the concern was how do we increase the productivity of the crops, and the green revolution was the answer. And we could not have escaped from green revolution at that point of time, simply because it was a question of feeding the mouths of the vast majority of the people in the country. We have succeeded to a certain extent, though there is a lot of disparity between the rich and the poor, but the green revolution has done quite a bit in terms of doing that. But then, having said that, now we are at a turning point, and that turning point is how do we ensure the productivity levels that we have in terms of what we have achieved through green revolution, and at the same time ensure the sustainability of the agricultural systems. The two things have, I mean, one is not talking either for this or against it. What is important is what is the kind of a coping up mechanism that we can have in order to be able to maintain our productivity level at the same level as it is happening now, and at the same time ensure sustainability of the system. And that is the context in which the sustainability of agriculture has to be looked. And to a certain extent this is applicable. Food security and sustainability are very closely linked with one another. Say for example, where there is no food security, the health issues becomes a very important concern, and say for example, the hygiene becomes a very important issue. This is very particularly true in very relatively poorer situations like in the northeastern region or in the tribal areas elsewhere and so on. And therefore, you have a high incidence of amoebic dysentery and things of that kind. We have achieved to a certain extent. Whatever we have achieved is in a patchwork manner. Some people have been much greater beneficiaries. A vast majority of the population has still to go a long way in terms of being able to ensure for themselves a reasonable food security, and at the same time a reasonable quality of life from the health point of view. I mean, the tribal population, for example, are one of the most neglected for one reason, for whatever the reasons may be, but we have to go a long way in those areas. And the rural poor in the rural environment that we have even in the plains of the country are extremely weak in terms of both food security as well as in terms of the health issues that are there. So, I mean, we are dealing with almost 3/4 of the population who are relatively more marginalized than the rest of the, probably much of it is concentrated within about 10 or 15% of the population.
What advice you will give to our future generation regarding environmental problems in India, sir?
The youngsters are the pulse of the nation, and the younger generation has to be given the right kind of training in order to be able to address sustainability issues. And this right kind of a training is possible only if we, in our educational system, we move away from the very narrow discipline based approach to studies. They are important. I am not underestimating the importance of disciplinary studies and disciplinary specializations and so on, but we need to create a critical mass of people among the younger generation who are not only interdisciplinary, but they are able to reach out to the transdisciplinary dimensions, and that is where the future of the country lies. Now, by disciplinary efforts we have achieved green revolution. Now, the green revolution has done a lot of good for the country, but it has also done a lot of damage to the environment, and the sustainability of that green revolution has become an issue. Now, at one point of time such an issue arose in the Western Ghats, and we were asked to look at the issue of sustainable fertility management because of excessive use of fertilizer. and this was in the tea garden area, and the request came from the tea garden managers. A group of scientists, there were a group of French scientists and Indian scientists who were involved in that initiative, and using naturally available natural resources, locally available natural resources, we were able to standardize a technology where we do not make drastic departures from intensive management of the land, but bring about buffering mechanisms using traditional ecological knowledge, and created a hybrid technology which was able to increase the lifespan of the tea bush, it was able to increase the productivity of the tea bush, and it was also enabled the tea garden managers to improve the quality of the tea bush, because organic residue management was the solution that was offered, and the right kind of organic residue management. Now, that technology, I was told, has now gone right up to China. This technology eventually got patented at one point of time between the tea garden managers and the scientists who were involved, and that technology has been taken right up to China. There are some very isolated examples of this nature, and I think we need to magnify this and take it out to a much larger sections of the society. And in order to take it to the larger sections of the society, we have to create a critical mass of scientists who are transdisciplinary, who are able to look at day to day issues from a transdisciplinary angle, because the problems at the ground level are not disciplinary problems, they are problems that are transdisciplinary, and therefore the issues have to be addressed in a transdisciplinary manner, and therefore we need to create a critical mass of scientists who will be able to get into those dimensions.
So, before we conclude, what is the take home message you would like to give to our viewers?
The take home message has to be depending upon whom we are talking to. As teachers, if I may start with the teachers, as teachers we have to get people more and more involved in interdisciplinary, or rather even transdisciplinary studies, and the entire issue of sustainability or sustainability science is centered around transdisciplinarity. Sustainability issues cannot be addressed by disciplines alone by themselves, and that is one of the take home messages that I would like to give. And if transdisciplinarity has to be promoted, then in that case we as teachers have to conscientiously get involved with transdisciplinary teaching, transdisciplinary studies. We need to create reading materials in terms of transdisciplinary areas and promote that kind of an activity in a major way. That is very important. Now, scientists very often have a tendency to operate in isolation, and taking science to society is extremely important. And one of the reasons we are not able to take science to society is because the science tends to look at science in isolation, and what we discussed so far is about transdisciplinarity, and therefore taking science to society is extremely important, and one needs to work in that direction either through outreach volumes to take science to a wide section of the society. We need to create audiovisual documentaries and so on in order to be able to take science to society and create environmental awareness, in developmental awareness, and even empower the local community to tell the developmental planners that you are not doing the things in the right way that we want it to be. So, that kind of community awareness has to be created, and so the scientists have to use a whole variety of spoken, written as well as audiovisual media in order to be able to take science to society. The policy planners and the developmental agencies should make much more conscious effort in order to be able to have community participatory efforts of the kind that I was talking about in the Nagaland that happened. That was one event that happened. We need to multiply those kind of events in different parts of the country, and that requires critical mass of people who can deliver to the policy planners and developmental agencies what they want to deliver in order to have community participation. So, each one of us have a role to play in the ultimate analysis. I think it is just like an orchestra, that everybody has to do his bit in order to be able to ensure community participatory conservation linked sustainable management of natural resources with sustainable food security and larger sustainable development of the society.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very elaborate, cogent, studied with facts and figures, your arguments and discussion analysis on issues of environment and development. Thank you very much.
Thank you.